Good evening. I hope you're all doing well. We're learning Maseches Kesubos Daf Mem Beis, and we're starting Baruch Hashem at a new parak, the parak of Nara Shenispatsa. We've been discussing over the last parak, which is the parak of Elu Naros, the halachic implications of the psukim and chumash that speak about a knas that's given to a man who violates a woman or who seduces a woman. And the conversation continues into this parak as well. We'll be learning today most of Mem Beis and Mid Beis, and then we'll stop at the bottom. Tomorrow night, blot and a half. Shabbos, blot and a half. Sunday, it will learn in the morning, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday will be over voice recording, most likely. Keep you posted. The new parak opens at the bottom of Mem Aleph and Mid Beis. Nara shenispatsa, if there is a Nara who was seduced, boshta ufigama ukinasa shalaviha. Her boshes, her pigam, her reduction in cost, and her knas goes to the father. V'hatzar bitfusa. And if a woman was bitfusa, which is the same thing as anusa, it just means that she was violated against her will, then we add in tsar. We discussed this in the previous parak. We're under a halachic assumption that there's no tsar when it comes to a woman who's been seduced, because at the end of the day, she was complicit, and therefore we assume that there was no tsar. Now, the Gemara adds an iteration here. Amda bidin. Amidas hadin is a halachic moment in time where someone was brought to Bezdin, and the Bezdin paskined that a person owed a particular amount of money. So Amda bidin, if in fact Bezdin paskined that the ma'anes, the man who violated this woman, or the mafata, the man who seduced this woman, that he owes money. So ad shalom sa'av, up until the time that the father is not yet dead, after the Amidas Hadin, Harehein Shalab, all the money belongs to the father. Meisaf, if after the Amidas Hadin, after it was established that the father is owed money, that the daughter was violated, the Ma'anes is guilty, but the father died already, so then Harehein Shalach, and then it goes to his Yorshim. Lo he speak alamod bedinat shemeisaf, but if the Amidas Hadin had yet to take place before the father died, no Amidas Hadin yet, then Harehein Shal Atzma. Amda bidin, if there was a midas adin ad shelo bagra, it was after Nairus, but before bagra, before she became a bogeres, harehin shalav, mesav harehin shalachin, if her father dies, then the monies go to the brother. Lo he speak alamod bidin ad shebagra, and if amidas hadin was not done before bagrus, before she reached 12 years and 6 months, what's the halacha? The Mishnah concludes harehin shal atzma, then it belongs to her. And then the Mishnah says all of this is really the Tanakama. However, Reb Shimon is of the opinion, Reb Shimon is of the opinion that we're not focusing on the time of Amidas Hadin, of the time when the Bezdin actually determines that the man who violated or seduced this woman is actually guilty, that's not the moment in time, but rather it's whether or not the money has transferred hands yet. And that is, imlohi speak legabos at shemesav harein shalatzma. Then if the money doesn't trade hands yet, then the money goes to her. So that's the machlokas between the Tanakama and Reb Shimon as to whether or not the moment in time that we're looking at is the moment in time of Amda B'din, or the moment of time of legabos, where the money was actually collected. As we turn to the top of Mem Beis Amud Aleph, we learned something that seems to be pretty klaliistic as it relates to Shas, and that is on the top of Mem Beis Amud Aleph that Maisi Yadeha Umitziyasa, that her handiwork and items that are found in her name, Afal Pisha Lo Gafsa, even though she hasn't collected them yet, Mesahav Harehin Shalachin. She has no possessions; they belong to her father, and if her father dies, then it goes to his brothers, to his Yorshim. Asks the Gemara, we learned in the Reisha these halachos that we've already learned in the previous parak, and the Gemara doesn't like having things that are duplicative. So the Gemara is bothered. Our Mishnah teaches us basically nothing new in the Reisha of our Mishnah, because we already learned in the previous parak. That if a man seduces a woman, he has to pay 3 things, and if he rapes her, then it has to be 4. That if a man seduces a woman, he has to pay for boshes, he has to pay for embarrassment, he has to pay for pigam, lowering her cost, and knas, what the Torah defined as a punishment. And mosiv alav ones shenosin es atzar. Again, as mentioned already in our Mishnah today and in the last parak, that when it comes to a mefate, there's no tsar, but when it comes to an ones, then there is tsar. We've already learned this. Our Mishnah and the Reish is teaching us absolutely nothing new. So what then was the point of our Mishnah if we already learned this in the previous parak? So the Gemara says, we needed to make sure that everyone knows that the money goes to the father. Says the Gemara, come on, everybody knows that this money goes to the father because by virtue of the fact that the mefata, the man who seduced, is giving over the money, she was complicit. Why would she be the one to get the payments? She agreed in the end. She okay, I'm not saying it was what she wanted initially, but she was coerced and she agreed in the end to sleep with him. So she shouldn't be getting the payments. Midaita avad. She did this again with her own recognition, with her own knowledge, with her own understanding. So therefore, obviously the money is going to go to the father. So therefore, the Gemara says no. Why is it that we needed our Mishnah? Because we already have another Mishnah saying the same thing. The Gemara responds 10 lines down. The reason why our Mishnah is listed the way that it's listed is to make sure that we have the opportunity to learn about the machlokes between Reb Shimon and the Rabbanon. Let's review. What is the machlokes Reb Shimon and the Rabbanon? That the line in the sand of ownership of money, according to the Tanakama, was Amada B'din. Once Bezdin says that this man either was a mefata or a manes, and according to Reb Shimon, it wasn't that. It was about givia, about collection of actual money. The Gemara says about a quarter of the way down to Nan Hassam, we have a Mishnah elsewhere. This Mishnah is in Maseches Shavuos, and the Mishnah says as follows. Of course, Maseches Shavuos is all about halachic promises. So how would it play out if a person made a promise and lied? So the Gemara says, if a man says, Anasta upitis esbiti, you either raped or seduced my daughter, and the defendant says, I absolutely did not rape or violate your daughter or seduce your daughter. And then the father says, Mashbiacha ani. Then the man says, Mashbiacha ani. The father says, I want you to make a promise to me. And he says, V'amer amen. Amen is a sign that I agree to the Shavua. So now we have this dialogue where the father accuses the defendant. The defendant not only denies it verbally, but accepts a shvua upon himself that he did not do anything wrong. And then contrition takes over and he feels guilty. So he says, you know what, I lied. I made a shvua, which I shouldn't have done, but I made a shvua and I lied. So the halacha is chayev. What is he chayev for? So take a look at Rashi. Rashi is 8 lines down, 4 lines into the thinner lines. Dibur hamaskil chayev. Rashi says he's obligated to pay Keren v'chomesh, the principal plus 20%, and v'asham. He has to bring a korban. He has to bring a korban because he lied, and it's a korban for a shvua. Im hoda acharechen v'zehu asham gzelos. This is called an asham gzelos, which we read about in the parak that we say in davening in the morning before Rebbe Shmuel. Fine. So that's what the Gemara says in this Mishnah that he's chayav. And in that Mishnah, in Shavuos, the Gemara says, third of the way down, Reb Shimon poter, she'enu mishalem knas al pi atzmo. Reb Shimon says, no matter what, this person's going to be pater. Even if he would have admitted it, Meirosh, he's going to be pater because moda b'knas is pater. We learned this the other day, that when one admits to a punishment that he is obligated to give that is a knas. A knas is an amount of money that's really unrelated to the damages that are done. It's a conceptual consequence. So let's say you violated a woman, you have to pay 50 shekel. There are also other payments, but the knas, the slap on the wrist, is the 50 shekel. When you speed and you get a ticket, that's not mida keneged mida. It's a knas. It's a knas. It's not logical. You didn't cause any damage. It's a knas. So here too, what we're saying is that according to Reb Shimon, even if you didn't lie, you wouldn't have had to pay a knas. So then here, even if you do lie, then certainly you wouldn't have to pay a knas. The shvua, you have to bring the korban asham. I agree, you have to bring a korban asham because you made a shvua and you lied. But to pay the knas is not correct. So Amrulo, the Chachamim said to Reb Shimon, Afal pisha enu mishalim knas al pi atzmo. Even though it's true, you're right that maybe where there should be no knas, aval mishalim boshes upkam al pi atzmo. But Reb Shimon at least agreed to us that this man would still need to pay the boshes and pigam. He would still need to pay for whatever embarrassment took place and for whatever reduction in value occurred by sleeping with this woman. Halfway down, the Gemara discusses a dialogue with Abaye and Rava. This will carry the day. This machlokes, this distinction between Abaye and Rava is going to last for the next Amud. Abaye and Rava, excuse me. Abaye says to Rava, Ha'omer lechavero If a man says to his friend, Anasta upitisa es biti, you either raped or violated or seduced my daughter, and I brought you to Bezdin, and Bezdin said, you're obligated to pay me money. V'hu omer, the defendant says, Lo anasti v'lo pitisi, I did not rape your daughter, I did not seduce your daughter. V'lo ha'emad tani bedin, and you did not bring me to Bezdin. V'lo nischayavti loch mamo, nor am I obligated to pay you any money. So you have the plaintiff and the defendant. The plaintiff makes his complaint, and the defendant perfectly shuts it down and says, I disagree. V'nishba. In fact, the defendant is so sure about his shita that he actually makes a shvuah. But then contrition takes over, v'hoda, and he admits. So Abaye is asking Rabbah, what would be the halacha l'Reb Shimon? L'Reb Shimon, we know that in the previous piece of Gemara, we had said that Reb Shimon highlighted the fact that this was a knas. Do we say, and this is a very important lumdus to understand, do we say 2/3 of the way down, 5 lines before the wide lines, that kevan de amad bedin, once Bezdin makes a determination that the ma'anes or the mafate, the man who did the violating, is obligated a certain amount of money, do we then say that the knas now turns into mamona havoy, u'mechayev alei korban shvua, or odilma afal gab de amad bedin, that even though Bezdin already made a clear stipulation, or they've already adjudicated, they say that this man is chayev to pay X, then would we still say knas have? Meaning, do we say that there's a line in the sand as it relates to amada bedin, that up until the time of Ha'amada B'din, we view the money as knas. But once Bezdin establishes how much money the ma'anes or the mafata has to give, then it turns into mammon or no? So Amar Le, Rabbah says back to Abaye, and we're 3-4 lines before the wide lines on Membez Amar Aleph, Amar Le, mamona have umechayev ale korban shvua. So Rabbah paskins. Remember, Rabbah was a 3rd century Amora, and Abaye was 4th century. Remember that Rabbah and Rav Yosef argue all the time, and Abaye and Rava with an Aleph argue all the time. So really, Abaye was in Rav Yosef's shiur, but Rav Yosef and Rabbah were the same generation. And he was talking in the base medrash with someone in the older generation. So that was what he said. And Rabbah paskin that after Amada B'din, after Bezdin adjudicates and they determine how much money this person owes, then the money is no longer in the category of knas. It is now going to be in the category of mammon, and that's what the Gemara says here. Amar le mamona have umechayev ale korban shvua. It's considered mammon, and he is obligated in a korban shvua because he made a shvua that he really didn't do any of these things, and he lied, and he was caught red-handed. It's very, very bad to make a shvua. Very bad to make a shvua and to be wrong about it. We saw this Gemara I think is in this Masechta, that it's bad for a person to make a shvua, to make a neder. It's dangerous to do that. I can't remember what the mashal was. Anyone remember? Can't remember. But even the positive side of making a neder was frowned upon. Okay, we're coming up to Rosh Hashanah. We're going to do Ataras and Darim. We have to, and we know all the different languages, Konam and Shvua. We have to get back into the mindset. Okay. So now that's the shita of Rabbah. The Rabbah holds that Hamada B'din transitions the financial consequence from knas to mammon. Says Abaye to Rabbah, Esvei, but I have a brisa. I have our Mishnah actually. Reb Shimon Omer. Reb Shimon is of the opinion. Yachol Omer lechavero. It could be that a man says to his friend, Anasta upitisa esbiti. That a man could say to his friend, I believe that you raped or violated or seduced my daughter. V'hu Omer lo anasti v'lo pitisi. The defendant says, I did not rape and I did not seduce your daughter. Or the claim was, Hemis shorcha es abdi. The plaintiff says that your shor killed my slave. V'hu omer lo hemis. And the defendant says, no, my shor did not. Oh, she'omar lo avdo. Or an eved says to his master, Hipalta es shini, v'simisa es eni. We know, of course, that an eved is set free based on psukim and chumash if the master injures him in a way where one of his teeth fall out or where one of his eyes is damaged. So let's say that that's the claim that the eved makes to his master. And again, in all of these cases, the defendant says, Lo hipalti v'lo simisi, none of your teeth fell out and I didn't blind you. And then v'nishba v'hoda, and the defendant makes a shvua, but he's contrite and then he lied. And then he admits that he lied. Yachal Yehei Chayiv. Maybe we would have said that the person is Chayiv. So then says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar v'kichesh be'al. There's a long pasuk. V'kichesh be'amiso be'pikadon o be'tzumas yad o be'gezel o esek o ashakas amiso o matza aveda v'kichesh ba v'nishba al sheker. So says the Gemara, what's the drush on this pasuk based on the word v'kichesh? Ma elu miyuchadin shehein mamon. Just like all the cases listed here have to do with mamonos. Of kol shehein mamon, that includes all cases that are mamon. Yatsa elu shehein knas, to exclude the cases of knas where they would in fact be held accountable for a shiur. So that's what the Gemara says for that. V'kichesh is an exemption on mamonos. So then, what's the question from this brisa that Abaye is asking from Rabbah, and that brings us to the top of Mem Beis Amud Beis. The Gemara says, "My la b'she'amad b'din." Don't we see from this brisa that we're talking about a case in this brisa where the case was already adjudicated in Bezdin and amad b'din happened? But then why would there ever be a knas? Remember, Rabbah, you held that Amad B'din transfers over the conceptual finances from knas to mamon. So that doesn't work. If this brisa says Amad B'din, Rabbah, then this doesn't make sense according to it. What would Rabbah answer? So it says the Gemara, lo. No, this case is not talking about Amad B'din. Says the Gemara, Bishalo Amad B'din. I asks the Gemara, that doesn't make sense. But if the Reisha, as we established already, was talking about Ha'amad B'din, so then Seifa Nami b'Sha'amad B'din. We always like to have a source be consistent from Reisha to Seifa in regards to the fundamental pillars of the case. So here, what we're talking about is whether or not there was a Ha'amad B'din. If there was Amad B'din in the Reisha, that's a fundamental pillar of our case. We should therefore assume that it's true in the Seifa as well. Seifa Nami b'Shamad B'din, third line to Ktani Reisha, Ein li ela dvarim shemishalmin alein es hakeren. Tashlume kefil, tashlume arba v'chamisha v'ones v'amafata mosi shem raminayin. I know, says the Gemara, the halachos about paying principal, the keren. But what about the consequence of knas? Says the Gemara, and we'll have to hold on to this for just a moment. It's a multi-step argument. Says the Gemara, Talmud Lomer uma'ala ma'al, a double language, riba, that we see that there are extra things included in our case in the Mishnah. What is this talking about? It says the Gemara, Heichidami, Ida lo amad b'din. If this is a case where it was lo amad b'din, so then kfeila mi'ika, you can't pay kefil without bezdin. Of course, there had to be amad b'din. Elapshita b'sha amad b'din. Umi the reisha b'sha amad b'din. And if the reisha is amad b'din, then seifa nami b'sha amad b'din. So therefore, the Gemara's question is very strong. Rabbah wanted to say that the case that you described was a case of shelo amad b'din, because that fits for Rabbah, because Rabbah was trying to say that really amad b'din is a transition point to change the finances from knas to mamon, but that doesn't work. So Amar Lei, Rabbah says, really, yachilna, conceptually, I could have given you an answer. Yachilna l'shnuye lach reisha b'sha amad b'din, v'seifa b'shala amad b'din. Technically, I could have done that for you. I could have argued that the reisha was talking about amad b'din and the seifa was not. B'kula Reb Shimon he. And really, everything was of the opinion of Reb Shimon, because if you remember from our Mishnah, Reb Shimon doesn't look at Amad B'din as the line in the sand, changing something from Knas to Mamon. Reb Shimon says it's only the transferring of Mamon, the gove, when one actually collects the money. But, says the Gemara, V'shinuye dechiki lo meshanin anlach. But Rabbah says to Abaye, I'm not going to give you a bad answer. I'm wanting to give you a really strong answer. Just makes me question a lot of the things we've learned in Shas, because this sounds like a wonderful answer. Why can't this Mishnah just be like Reb Shimon? Well, we'll see in a moment why. De'im came. Abaye said, Rabbah says to Abaye, had it been that I gave you this argument, that the whole Mishnah is really Reb Shimon, De'im came, Amrasli, what would you have argued? Lisni Reisha, Reb Shimon Omer, Lisni Seifa, Dibir Reb Shimon. If the whole Mishnah was really Reb Shimon, then you should have said that. So therefore, Rabbah's not even willing, he's playing chess. I'm not even willing to give you the bad answer. I know what move you're going to do if I say X. So I'm not even going to say X. Ella Rabbah says, really, kulam bisha amad b'din. All of the cases that we're dealing with are amad b'din. V'reisha Rabbanon v'sefer Reb Shimon. And there's a machlokas, like we saw in our Mishnah, between the Rabbanon and Reb Shimon. And I agree with you, changing his answer slightly from what we saw on the previous page on Mem Beis Amud Aleph. Here he says that really there would be no korban that is brought in this case. And when I say that Amada Bedin establishes something as mamon that is only as it relates to lehorisho lebanav, that he's able to give it as a yerusha to his children. But really, it's not, Amada Bedin is really not a massive transition point between the world of Knas and the world of Mammon. Fine. So he answers that question, and then Abaye comes back with yet another question against Rabbah. Esive, we have another source in our Mishnah that's problematic for Rabbah. Reb Shimon Omer, Imlo he speaka legabos at Shemei Sa'av. We had said in our Mishnah that according to Reb Shimon, that if there wasn't enough time for the father to collect the knas from the ma'anes or the mefate before the father died, harehein shel atzma, then the money goes to the woman herself, to the woman who was violated. Says the Gemara, Abaye says to Rabbah, how can you say that Amad Bedin is a moment where things change from Knas to Mammon? If your argument is that we're talking about really that it's Lahorish Labanav and it's Mammon is only as it relates to be Horish Labanav, so then La'atz Mamai, why then would it ever go to her? Says the Gemara, the Achin Ba'e Mehave, it still should have gone to the brothers. So Omar Rava says, this is an age-old question. Ha milsa kshoiba Rabba v'Rav Yosef, esrin v'tartin shnin. Rabba and Rav Yosef, they did not understand how to navigate this question of Abaye. Okay, Abaye lived after them. Abaye asked a question, and his Rebbeim were like, yeah, welcome to the club. This shiur has been asked from since you were born, Abaye. This is a long-standing question. Esrin v'tartin shnin. The question is 22 years old. Below Ifrak, there was no answer. Adi Yosef Rav Yosef beresha upirka. Until Rav Yosef sat at the head, meaning until Rav Yosef became the Rosh HaYeshiva, upirka, and then he gave an answer. How did he give the answer? How do we understand why it is that the money would go to her and not as a Yerusha to the father's family? Says the Gemara, Shiny Hasam to Amar Krav and Nasan Haisha Shoche Vimalavi Anara Chamishim Kesef. This is the pasuk that says, the man that laid with his daughter gives to the father 50 kesef, 50 shekel. Lo zichsa Torah le'av elamishas nasina. The only time that the father is able to actually take the money is mishas nasina. Here is the exception and not the rule. But really the rule is that it should go to, like Rabbah says, that it should go to the bana. But here is an exception to the rule. Here she gets it because that's what the pasuk in Chumash wants. Lo zichsa Torah la'av elamishas nasina. Okay, that's what the Gemara says is the exception. The Gemara says that doesn't work. If you're going to say that only knasos are going to be are different, all the other knasos are different, I have another knas that breaks the rule. Says the Gemara 2/3 of the way down, Elameata, if your rule is correct, that there's an exception to be made by Shar Knasos. Elameata gabe eved d'chsiv kesef shloshim shkalim yitain ladona. We see another language of Nesina. Hachanami lo zichsa Torah la'adon elamishas Nesina. Maybe we should say the rules are different with an eved because that's a knas as well. Says the Gemara, don't say that because yitain lechud v'nasan lechud. The words of yitain and v'nasan are not similar as it relates to drashos. They're not identical terminologies. Yehachi, says the Gemara, why was it Talmud Omar v'kichesh? Why is it that Rabbah had to quote the pasuk of Akichesh? He should have said Talmud Omar v'nasan mi boile. If it nasan is the whole kunst of the whole under, why do we have two psukim? Says the Gemara, Omar Rava, and we're coming to the end of our daf for today. Omar Rava, ki itzrich v'kichesh. When do we need the case, the pasuk of Akichesh, the brisa that Rabbah quoted at the bottom of the previous page? Says the Gemara, that's kigon she'amda bedin ubagra. He was established, the man, the ma'anes or the mefata was established that he owed money. And then she was bagra, she became 12 years and 6 months. Umesa, and then she died. Tahasam ki yaris aviha mina dida kayaris. Then it comes from her and he inherits from her. Yachi, says the Gemara, then yatsu elu shehin knas. This is not a knas anymore. Now it's mamon. Mamon who? So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Yatsu Elu Sheikran Knas. You can't really look at it here. These fundamentally were a Knas, even though there was a change that took place, but fundamentally they're still considered a Knas. We're going to stop right here at the Esvei, and tomorrow we'll ask one more question on Rabbah from Abaye, and then we'll pick up tomorrow on Yirtzeh Hashem learning Daf Mem Gimel and Mem Daled Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.